Today we're gonna be making 3 kabocha recipes. All of them are my favorite and one of them is a very popular recipe among viewers too. Halloween is coming up, so let's pumpkin. This English might not be make any sense, but anyway, we're gonna begin with the miso soup udon noodles. This recipe is filling, comforting, and takes you 20 minutes to make it one pot. I have a kabocha squash. If you're not familiar with the kabocha squash, it's the most popular squash in Japan. The taste is a cross between the squash and sweet potato. And as you can see, the skin is pretty hard, but 100% edible. Kabocha is loaded with the beta-carotene, iron, fiber, and also packed with vitamin C and B vitamins. To make it easier to cut, just pop them into the microwaves at 600 watt for about 1.5 minutes with the cover on. In a way, you don't end up having a hard time chopping it like me. Just roughly chop them into small pieces. Chinese cabbage. It's a winter seasonal vegetable in Japan, so I use it a lot for stir fry and hot pot. Next, thinly slice the Japanese leeks. Leeks tends to catch the dirt between the leaves, so make sure to wash it thoroughly. You can also substitute to yellow onion and spring onion. Next, shiitake mushrooms. Remove the stem and slice it thinly. You can use any type of mushrooms. We are not gonna waste this stem. Tear it by hand and it's gonna give a nice stringy meaty texture. If the bottom is too dry and hard to eat, please cut it off. Now the prep is done. Into the pot, pour 3 cups of water. Throw everything all in once. What I love about this recipe is everything can be done in one pot and it's very forgiving. You will hardly make any mistakes. Then add a teaspoon of kombu dashi powder or use your favorite stock powder you have on hand. Pop the lid. Start heating up over high heat. Once it comes to a boil, reduce the heat to medium and cook it off for about 10 minutes until the kabocha squash breaks down into small chunks. On the halfway through, the kabocha squash is fully cooked, but it is still holding the shape. By the way, if you can't find the kabocha squash, you can swap for sweet potatoes or any kind of squash you have on hand. After another 5 minutes, you can see the kabocha squash is broken down and melted into the soup. You can see the soup starts to become lightly golden in color because of the kabocha squash. And this is gonna give the natural sweetness to your soup. If you decide to opt for squash and sweet potato, please cook it off until there's no more big chunk in your soup. Time to add the udon noodles. I'm gonna use a frozen one since I like the thick, chewy texture of it. But of course, you can use dry noodle or even rice noodle works in this recipe. Make sure to cook it al dente beforehand if you decide to go for dried noodles. Feel free to top up the water if it's needed. And in a couple of minutes, the udon noodle is thawed and separated and it becomes more playable. Make sure not to overcook it. I love to have a little bit of texture left. At this point, add 1.5 tablespoons of miso paste. I picked the yellow miso paste because it has a hint of sweetness and it's not so overpowering, but you guys can use any kind of miso you have on hand. Scoop into the ladle and break it down with a chopstick until it becomes pasty. In a way, you won't have a lump in your soup. Stir that in. Then add 1 teaspoon of soy sauce. Sorry, I forgot to film this part. Off the heat. And remember that each miso paste has a different sodium content. Please have a quick taste and adjust the taste by adding more miso paste or water. And time to assemble into the bowl. I'm serving it into the clay pots just for the presentation. Sprinkle some chopped spring onion and ready to be enjoyed. Udon will be coated with the heavenly thick, sweet kabocha miso soup. It's one of the easiest noodle recipes, but the flavor is complex. The sweetness from the kabocha squash together with the deep, mellow flavor from the miso paste, chewy udon noodles for a fun texture. If you can't think of any for dinner, then try this one. It's that easy. The next one is a kabocha miso creamy spread, which is perfect for a meal prep. After you wash the kabocha squash, carefully cut the kabocha into about 300 grams. Make sure that the flat side is down. Gently shift the knife and just be careful with your hand. Remove the seeds into the microwave safe container. Microwave it 600 watt for about 7 minutes or until the kabocha becomes fork tender. Alternatively, you can also steam it in the pot. Meanwhile, finely chop some celery. This celery will give a great texture to the spread. It's optional, but I highly recommend not to skip this. By the time your kabocha squash is ready, be careful with the steam. Scoop out the inside, then mash it with the fork or potato masher. I keep the skin and add into the soup later. You could mash it into the spread, but the skin part is usually a bit more tough, so it won't be as smooth as it would be. Kabocha miso udon noodle soup really perfect way to use up these leftover skins. Now to season it, in goes 1 tablespoon of natural oil to moisten a little bit, plus 2 pinch of salt, half tablespoon of miso paste, again preferably either yellow miso or white miso, 1 tablespoon of vegan yogurt. Here I'm using soy, and lastly 2 tablespoons of vegan mayo. To make it even more enjoyable, add the crunchy factor, which is a celery in this case. This can be easily stored for about 2 to 3 days in the fridge. I actually made it the night before so that the coming morning all I have to do is assembly, which is always a bonus. If you want to drizzle some maple syrup together with a sprinkle of nuts. I love the combination of sweet and salty. If you do as much as I do, and you're gonna love this one. The last one is from a fall meal prep video. It's a kabocha tomato curry stir fry. After cleaning the inside, wash them thoroughly and place it on the flat side down and cut from the top by rocking your knife back and forth. The skin is pretty hard, so make sure to use a good heavy knife. Like I mentioned earlier in this video, popping into the microwave for a couple minutes will help to soften the skin. Place them on the sheet pan and drizzle your favorite oil. Season with the Italian salt, which includes salt, pepper, oregano, basil, and red bell pepper powder. If you don't have one, just use salt and pepper. Dig in your hand and toss them to coat. Bake them in the oven 200 Celsius for about 15 minutes. Please apply the temperature and time to your particular ovens. When the kabocha is fork tender, you know it's ready. Meanwhile, we're gonna chop the vegetables. Thinly slice the onion. The onion is the hidden star of this dish, so make sure to use it a lot. I have 2 cups worth of sliced onion equivalent to 350 grams. Do the same for garlic. Remove the stem of the cherry tomato. If you have a ripe one, those would be perfect for this recipe. Heat olive oil over high heat. Add onion and garlic. Sprinkle half teaspoon of salt and cook it over mid-heat until it's caramelized. Splash some water as needed to deglaze the pan. While it's cooking, drain the oil of canned tuna. Drain and rinse the chickpeas. When the onion is nice and brown, add tuna, chickpeas, and half teaspoon of curry powder. Cook it over mid-heat for another minute or so to open up the flavor. Then add cherry tomato and baked kabocha squash. Continue to heat it up until tomato is blistered. Lastly, season with 1 tablespoon of soy sauce. One more mix and off the heat. Always make sure to do the taste test. This will last 4 days in the fridge, and you can top it over the salad together with the drizzle of oil and lemon juice. Just as a side note, the kabocha squash tends to get dried as time passes. If you have a leftovers, you can create a delicious soup, which is my absolute favorite. To the pot, add the leftovers, followed by canned tomato and water. I just go by eye, especially how much you have leftovers will drastically change the taste. The more kabocha you have, it's gonna be sweeter. The more onion you have, it's gonna be more savory and bold in taste. Pop the lid and cook it for another 10 minutes or so. When the soup is thickened, add red miso paste. I personally love the combination of tomato and red miso. You don't taste the miso that much, but it will create the depth in taste. Starting with 1 tablespoon and adding more by tasting it. Cook it for another 5 minutes or so with the lid on. I added mirin since it's a bit tart for kids, but this is totally optional. I didn't add the bouillon cube since it was flavorful enough. You can always play around with what you have. Ready to enjoy it. I also have a couple recipes using kabocha squash on my blog, so let me leave the link for you in the description box below. Sorry not to be able to deliver you new recipes this week. My kids have been catching a cold 2 weeks in a row, so we couldn't film it. But next week, I promise to be back with the new recipes. So happy Halloween, you guys. またね. Bye bye. ギュって。こいでこいで。できない？あれだ。